right, let's start this. This is chapter 9 of Nazis in the Occult. This is the chapter called The Obedient Man, which is about Himmler mostly. And so this chapter focuses on Himmler and his obsessions. He was a very good secretary and loved spying on others and collecting their secrets. He thought that one might never know when the secrets of others could come in handy. Himmler reminds me of all the busybodies in 2020 who would gladly rat you out to the authorities for not falling in line with their dumb humiliation rituals. Himmler was also very interested in the Bhagavad Gita and other Eastern esoteric texts, so is Oppenheimer. These kinds of texts serve as an entry point for detachment. Once one is able to internalize detachment, one can do destructive things without blinking an eye. In Himmler's case, his detachment and belief in the dark occult would propel him to order prisoners to be frozen and then, when near death, placed in bed with prostitutes to see if body heat would restore them. In Oppenheimer's instance, detachment very likely helped him develop the atom bomb, and when it was done, he said, "Now I become death, the destroyer of worlds." So here's an image of Himmler, and let me go ahead and start reading. The combination of ideas offered a solution of sorts to the difficulty of applying traditional values to existing conditions. He could sustain his belief in the superiority of the class from which he came simply by equating the values of his own group with the characteristics of the dominant and moral man. This is a quote by Bradley F. Smith about Heinrich Himmler, a Nazi in the making. And I think that's an interesting quote because it reminds me sort of the so-called left today. It's a vibe. It's a set of dogma that if you believe, you're in the in group, and they believe they're also morally superior to everybody else, while maintaining authoritarianism at the same time. So I think that's pretty interesting. A searching study of Heinrich Himmler's early years helps us to understand the kind of mentality which yearned for the return of the Atlantean age, and which could go on to carry out Lanz von Liebenfeld's extermination policies, all while considering himself a decent human being. Right? So it touches on this idea of bureaucracy and the sort of banality of evil and how they were just doing their jobs. Just like all of the people during that 2020 time period were just following orders and doing their jobs. And they really thought that they were morally superior than everybody else. I think Bill Gates is flashing in my mind right now. Born on October 7th, 1900, the second son of a Bavarian professor, and that's another theme you see in this sort of activist class, or these people that become bureaucrats within the government systems. They're often coming from families of an upper middle class echelon, even Marx. So the second son of a Bavarian professor who became tutor to the son of the Prince of Wittelsbach, Himmler grew up in the Catholic faith. At 19, he was earnest enough about his religion to have noted in his diary an internal conflict over a common fraternity practice. Quote, "During the sermon, I had to endure an inner struggle more serious than any before. The dueling business constantly keeps cropping up. In the evening I prayed. I had, of course, earlier partly overcome it." So he did earlier overcome it partially. "God will continue to help me overcome my doubts." He must have decided that God was not opposed to dueling because he regularly practiced it. 2 decades later, at Reichsfuhrer SS, he has expressed no such qualms over the Jewish massacre. His diary entries recorded in meticulous detail the exact times of arrival and departure of buses and people. So this is where he's a really efficient and systematic secretary and spy. And it just seems to be something that he was born with. Let's blame it on the stars once again. Uh, so he would take these details of departure of buses and people and the number of swims he took, banal impressions of books he read, pointing to a pedantic, assiduous character prone to pontificating. He was a collector of stamps and secrets. He took it upon himself to spy on his older brother's fiancée, going so far as to hire a private detective to gather incriminating evidence of her disloyalty, and succeeding in the end to end the betrothal, which is, I guess he really didn't like this woman and found out that she was, I guess, cheating. I mean, it's not very clear here. That's what it seems like from what I just read, but that's crazy. That's wild. I don't know anyone that has hired a private detective to follow around their brother or sister's fiance. Once he left the safe haven of his smug middle-class family, his rigid character structure could not bend to the raw winds blowing through Germany. Never a careful thinker, he anguished over the impossibility of finding a respectable niche in the conventional society which gave him comfort. He had been an officer candidate during the war, but when it was over, there were rumors about attacks on officers in Bavaria by communist revolutionaries. Himmler wrote to his parents, urging them to send civilian clothes so that he could travel unmolested. He also begged them, buy all of the coal you can, and also all the food, even if you have to buy it by the pound. In 14 days, there will be no more coal and no more electric light. Father, you must join the Bayersvik Volksparty. It is the only hope. And so I have a couple of images from that. The Bavarian People's Party was principally Catholic, Christian, democratic political party in Bavaria during the Weimar Republic. After the collapse of the German Empire in 1918, it split away from the Federal Center Party and formed the BVP in order to pursue a conservative and regionalist stance. It dominated in state politics. All ministers, presidents from 1920 onwards were the BVP, and there's another image I found of this political party. A postscript only for his father's eyes cautioned, don't let mother go out alone at night, not without protection. Be careful in your letters, you can't be sure. So he's also a very paranoid type of person. In self-defense, Himmler slowly adopted more and more of the ideology of the radical right, to the distress of his moderate family. This sounds so familiar. Some of these mass shooters, if the narrative about Tyler Robinson is to be believed, it sounds like something that happened to him. And there was no internet, because it doesn't have to have the internet to happen. Just bad and chaotic times of unrest. Sentimental novels extolling the traditional virtues gave way, in his reading, to vitriolic accounts of the origin of World War I. Like Sabbatendorf, they blamed Germany's troubles on a Jewish Freemasonic world conspiracy. The world conspiracy theoreticians were they themselves beginning to assume the proportions of a world conspiracy. Some Catholics had long supported the view that Freemasons and Jews were liberal and potentially dangerous to the world order, but Himmler more and more withdrew from identification with the Church, which, though conservative, was not fanatical enough. He read the hate literature with delight, making terse comments in his diary. Like, can you imagine? Just like, also, all the Nazis look like weirdo nerds. Like this guy, like jotting stuff down in his diary. Oh, this is what I read today. A book that explains everything, he said, and tells us whom we must fight against next time. It is true, and one has the impression that it is objective, not just hate filled anti Semitism. Because of this, it has more effect. These terrible Jews. Even an initiate is shaken when he reads all this with understanding. If only some of the eternally blind could have put it before their eyes. So we covered some of these authors in the previous chapters, but here's an image of a Theodore Fritsch book um, that I'm sure he was a fan of. Uh, so writers like Fritsch, Chamberlain, and Gabinow helped him to justify his own frustrations, while the whole culture's increasing infatuation with spiritualism made it possible for him to bridge the gap between the death of the old religious faith and his personal longing for evidence of the existence of the supernatural. The books he read signified a deep involvement with and leanings toward spiritualism and the occult. He labeled occult theories unbelievably deep and significant, and particularly enjoyed Karl Deprel's Der Spiritismus, or spiritualism. So that's an image of Karl, something. But I mean, they had to stand there with their eyes open for a while, but this is creepy to me. And here's his book that Himmler was fond of. And he was fond of it because it really lets me believe in spiritualism and introduced me to it correctly for the first time. He was impressed by the arguments for transmigration of souls in a book on life after death, and noted that it gave him meaningful new grounds for believing in it. This interest in and sympathy with the occult endured throughout his life. Without it, his role as Reichsfuhrer SS would have been played out quite differently. As in the case of Lanz and Hitler, his occultism was bound up with eroticism. To all three, sexuality was decadent, and the loose morality of Western Europe after the war seemed to them to travel like a plague, spread by the decadent people, namely the Jews. They believed Jews were bestial in their passions, corrupting pure German womanhood and making all women join the radical cause of feminism. uh, I think a note here in my margin says it could never be patriarchy. They also saw the Jews as cunning, practical pimps and pornographers, able to profit materially from prostitution. But you'll see later in this chapter that Himmler would use prostitutes to do weird experiments. So all of these people are always creeps and hypocrites. I think they go after this stuff like they say, like on the surface level, that it disgusts them, but they want to control it themselves. I believe that's an observation that perhaps Andrea Dworkin made at one point. Hello, Terry Strange. What is going on today? Same as it ever was. I think I wrote that in one of these margins today while reading this. I'll just keep that up there because it's true. Same as it ever was. So these were popular Volkish themes, and Himmler accepted them. Right after World War I, Himmler was in contact with a number of Bavarian Volkish groups, which were working to get rid of the Republican government. In 1923, he joined the Free Corps, and he must have enjoyed the sense of participating in a grand design which was to lead Germany back to greatness. He was welcomed into the Nazi Party because, as his superior, Gregor Strasser, put it, the fellow's doubly useful. He's got a motorbike. I love that. He's got a motorcycle. So he must be good. Here's Gregor Strasser. So his quote says, the fellow's doubly useful. He's got a motorbike. And he's full of frustrated ambition to be a soldier. So those are the only qualifications, right? You ride up on your motorcycle, you're in. Himmler soon realized that he had a penchant for secret service. When in 1925 the SS was formed as a special bodyguard for Hitler in each district, Himmler was put in charge of the local unit. It brought him little glory at first. Its petty duties included soliciting for party newspaper subscriptions. In 1927, when the SS order was nationalized, Himmler, because of his demonstrated administrative abilities, was made deputy leader, and in 1929, Reichsfuhrer SS. And so I wrote here the banality of evil, Himmler as paper pusher. The nature of the organization changed. It became a central bureaucracy for dispensing terrorism, an elitist political police, giving Himmler powers second only to Hitler. What fitted Himmler for the job were his skill at pigeonholing people and assigning categories to them, and especially the rigid personality defenses he had developed as a student. As Bradley Smith has pointed out in his biography, the pose of omniscient hardness, which he developed early, made it possible for him to overcome his awkwardness in social encounters and to impose himself on others despite his lack of charisma. Kind of sounds like Mr. Beast to me. Just scroll right back up to Himmler here. I'm always, I don't know if I'm like surprised or not, but it's always interesting how weird they look to me. And I think I picked this picture because of his pose. I thought it was humorous. So he wasn't like a really, he was pretty awkward, but he masked that. And his social mask became a weapon habitually used to make others subordinate to his wishes. Thus, despite his colorlessness, he was able to compel his black guards to go against their own standards of morality and justify horrifying murder tactics as utopian idealism. And that's a theme that seems to repeat throughout time and space. This pursuit of a utopian ideal often ends in some kind of brutality. He said proudly of his black uniformed SS, "I know that there are many people in Germany who feel sick when they see this black tunic. We can understand that and do not expect to be beloved by over many people." And so, yeah, I have an image of the uniforms here with those awesome looking skulls and stuff. I think I'm thirsty, so let me take a really quick sip. Yeah, they would have loved it. They would have fit right in. One wonders if the ghosts of Nazis aren't operating some of these accounts. My imagination sometimes goes wild. I did take a break from Twitter because I couldn't see that stuff anymore, and I have other things I need to read and do, and I really could spend like hours on it. It's addictive, as we established in our live stream yesterday. Built that way on purpose with your little hearts for your instant validation. So these are the SS uniforms. Excuse me. Sometimes he saw his black guards as an elite cadre of Teutonic warriors. And there's always this too. There's always this fascination with the medieval knights and all of that stuff. And sometimes as medieval knights protecting their lord Adolf Hitler. Himmler's interest in the Germanic past and in the Middle Ages went back to his youth, when he used to spend summer vacations looking for ancient stones and artifacts, a hobby he learned from his father. Well, okay, well, we're about to get to that, so I might as well leave that one up there. His belief in the transmigration of souls led him to think he was the reincarnation of the 10th century German king Heinrich I the Fowler, with whom he communicated in his sleep. So to me, my wild imagination and things that I think sometimes, is maybe he did have dreams of this guy, and maybe it was really just a demon. I really don't think you can trust much of what you see in your dreams. It's a real distortion. In 1937, he had the monarch's bones dug up and placed in the crypt of Quedlinburg Cathedral. So he dug up this guy's bones and put them in the crypt of a cathedral after a holy procession. He chose the town of Quedlinburg in the Harz Mountains because it had been founded by the king. So I think I have an image of, and there's another image of Heinrich the Fowler. And this is Quedlinburg. Let's see. Where was I? So he chose this because it had been founded by the king. Himmler invited Germans to make a pilgrimage to the tomb to honor Heinrich the Fowler. Yearly on July 2nd, the date of the king's death, Himmler held a midnight ritual in the clammy crypt. One of the great charms which medieval monarch had for Himmler was his anti-Slav crusade. On the 1000th anniversary of Heinrich's death, Himmler stood before the Wehrmacht officers and braided and medaled SS dignitaries and pledged to continue the crusade for the German expansion in the East. It was not clear whether he was really talking about himself or about his namesake when he praised him. Like Liszt and Lanz, Himmler was obsessed with the secret medieval society called the Order of the Teutonic Knights. There, a candidate had to prove pure noble German ancestry for 8 generations on both sides of the family tree. Himmler, in creating a secret order suitable for a mass society, naturally dispensed with the idea of social or economic aristocracy and made the whole Aryan race aristocratic, an idea which Lanz and Liszt had popularized before him. He admired the rigid organization of the Teutonic Knights and the strictness of their rules, but he must have admired their secrecy above everything else, given his personal propensity for secrets. Even in his brief stint as orderly room clerk in the Army's officer candidate school, he had collected odd bits of personal information about fellow cadets, as if in apprenticeship for the job of secret police chief which lay in his future. A few years later, Gregor Strasser laughed him to scorn when he had heard about this and said, "Whatever use do you suppose will derive from knowing who did fatigue duties for insubordination in the Bavarian Infantry Regiment in 1919? To which Himmler replied, "One never knows." Oh my goodness. Himmler was so fanatical a spy that he noted about party members, quote, "Schwartz was playing Mendelssohn on his gramophone when I arrived. It is well to know of Semitic sympathies." And I noticed in Muck's bookcase a copy of Chamberlain's Foundations of the 19th Century. He is well chosen for the Führer's personal troop. What a weirdo! Always taking notes all the time on everybody. And about citizens in general, quote, "In the fishmongers, there was a man who mentioned in a low voice to his wife that he had suspected treachery in the ranks of the party. I made it my business to find out his name from the shopkeeper. Such information might be useful in the future." And I said, it reminds me of COVID busybodies. Himmler knew what a powerful motivation a secret order with difficult rules and a hierarchical structure could be. Its mere existence held members together in a common bond, subject to the same vows of silence on certain questions. I wrote cult next to that. In trying to create a new order of Teutonic Knights out of his SS, Himmler was also mindful of the power of the Jesuits. And the Jesuits were mentioned in the chat yesterday. So here's the Jesuit insignia. According to his assistant, Walter Schellenberg, he deliberately built the SS organization on the principle of the Society of Jesus, using their statues and spiritual exercises. And this happens all the time with religion and things like this. Rome co-opted all of the Christian imagery because it was gaining power, and so Himmler would too. In fact, Himmler was called the Black Jesuit by his enemies and compared with the order's founder, Loyola. And I do actually have a book about Jesuits that I bought when I was visiting Yale at a used bookstore. Maybe I'll read that sometime. Details the history of the Jesuits. So he was compared to Loyola by Hitler, who was pleased to have his fanatical devotion. Schellenberg testified at the Nuremberg trials that Hitler had the best and the richest library on the Jesuit order, whose literature he perused at night for years. Thus, he built up his SS organization according to Jesuit principles. Its basis was the Constitution and the exercises of Loyola. Its supreme law was absolute, blind obedience. Himmler himself, as SS general, was the order's general commander. In Westphalia, near Paderborn, he kept a medieval castle, the Wewelsburg. I don't know why I don't have a picture of it. I guess I forgot to put it. I believe that's the castle with the big black sun inside of it, which served, so to say, as the SS monastery. The roots of this attitude go back to his father's education and his severe Catholic conduct of life. The essential principle which Himmler borrowed from the Jesuits was the oath of absolute blind obedience. In this, he outdid the Jesuits, though he sought to eliminate all competition. And that's what I really think a lot of this is. When you co-opt all of these symbols and when you take things from these other secret orders, you want to make sure that you're the only game in town. So he sought to eliminate all competition to his own esoteric order and officially abominated the Jesuits. They and the SS did have a common enemy, although this enemy was the Freemason. And I've got Adam Weishaupt of the Illuminati here. His enemy was the Freemason who, in his resistance to the dogmas of original sin and grace, in his tolerance and humanism, became the symbol of the Enlightenment, with its belief in the possibility of human perfectibility on earth. Was a rival universal superstate, which threatened to replace the less flexible Catholic Church. It was rumored that the Jesuits had destroyed the 18th century order of the Illuminati by infiltrating the group, a mystical association started by Adam Weishaupt, a former Jesuit student, and diverting it from its original aims. And I also have some images of the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia, which if you're ever in Philadelphia and you're bored, I suggest visiting it. It's really beautiful, and it's really interesting inside. And it was there that I learned that Benjamin Franklin wanted our national bird to be a turkey because he thought eagles were mean. So the same suspicions were circulated about Jesuit intrigue in Masonic lodges. The introduction of hierarchical higher degrees into Freemasonry was scorned by some Masons as evidence of a Catholic spirit. There were papal bulls of condemnation against the Freemasons, but their power and political influence continued to increase throughout the Enlightenment. The new spirit, which was actually one of reason and an interest in material well-being, was viewed by the church as a threat to the faith. I think it was more of a threat to the church and their hegemony. The Jesuits used science in the service of faith, for their aim was never the dispassionate study of astronomy or biology, but the combating of Satan from the 19th century on in the guise of materialism. And then that's where I wrote, the more things change, they stay the same, right? Same as it ever was. Germany was the home of the first Jesuit settlement. In Bavaria, particularly, the order stood firm against Lutheranism and held that section of the country, so much so that Munich was called a German Rome. The Counter-Reformation in Germany was greatly helped by the erection of numerous schools. The zeal of the Jesuits filled the Lutherans with fear and trembling, and a vicious battle ensued. As René Philip Miller points out in The Power and the Secret of the Jesuits, quote, "It became more and more customary in Germany for men to express their strength of their religious convictions by filthy insults directed against their opponents." Yeah, they would have loved X. Totally. Oh, we aren't there yet. I got 4 people here. What's going on? 4 people. Jean-Paul is lurking again. Lurking again. That's okay. Just sit back, relax. Listen to me read about Nazis. I don't know why. Is it relaxing? Maybe. This is relaxing for me, and it makes me happy to see you guys. Turkeys are too delicious to be a national bird. Have you ever encountered a turkey, like in real life? Excuse me. They're really large and they'll chase you. They're like geese. They're like kind of scary. I'm only saying that because I was chased by a turkey once. True story. All right. It was in Bavaria too that the Jesuits introduced their unique system of spiritual exercises, reporting to the Pope, no small benefit has accrued from the exercises. Some who were falling away are now strengthened, and some who had fallen away are now restored. The exercises spread widely among the Bavarians, adapted to the working classes under the directive never to lay too heavy a burden on too little an enlightened spirit or too weak a heart. An exercise house was created in Munich, where an efficient lay apostolate was produced. I wonder what these exercises were. The spiritual exercises of the Jesuits are designed to awaken the natural powers of the will and to connect them with the divine will. It sounds a lot like some of the transcendental meditation we've been talking about. The pension is enjoined to undergo a rigorous series of pictorial imaginings. Okay, so they're manifesting. Oh my goodness. All right. Undergo a rigorous series of pictorial imaginings lasting 4 weeks, during which time he comes to see, hear, smell, and feel scenes of heaven and hell. He strives to converse with Jesus and pictures the incarnation. So not just manifesting, but like channeling, and this is not weird at all. And an exercise called composition, seeing the place, the imagination is used to clothe ideas with a visible form. There are prayers for a definite desire, and an exercise called fixing the objects. And in the end, the pension's life is changed forever. These exercises are considered the foundation of the order. There are a lot of people on the internet who have done more in-depth dives on the Jesuits, but this is all very interesting to me. They sound a lot like the other esoteric groups with their strange rituals and things. That Himmler practiced visualization is clear from Walter Schellenberger's account in his memoirs. When General Werner von Fritsch was brought to trial on the false accusation of homosexuality, Schellenberg reports, and here's the guy that they accused of homosexuality. I don't know, make up your own mind. I don't know what's going on with his eyes. Schellenberg reports, quote, I witnessed for the first time some of the rather strange practices resorted to by Himmler through his inclination toward mysticism. He assembled 12 of the most trusted SS leaders in a room next to the one in which von Fritsch was being questioned. So there's a room next to the room in which Fritsch was being questioned, in which there are 12 of these SS leaders who are being ordered to concentrate their minds on exerting a suggestive influence over the general that would induce him to tell the truth. I happened to come into the room by accident and to see the 12 SS leaders sitting in a circle, all sunk in deep and silent contemplation, was indeed a remarkable sight. Lord have mercy. All right. Himmler had derived his round table idea from the court of the 12th century Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. There's an image I found. Under the influence of nightly thought compulsion, the object of the round table's concentration had to submit his will to theirs. The student of occultism will recognize in the projection of Himmler's picture the magical view that through visualization we can change reality. It is an important trick of the trade. This is how the occultist believes he exercises his power, by holding in his mind a mental picture of what he wishes to achieve. Despite the fact that Himmler's odd ideas made him a ridiculous figure to his underlings, he ruled over them with an iron hand. In a quieter time, he would have been a harmless crank, cultivating his herb garden, studying astrology, graphology, antiquity, and mesmerism. His pursuit of these interests in the midst of, and even in the service of, the most awful atrocities in history has made some historians suspect he was mad. He had herb gardens planted right in the concentration camps. His order that prisoners be frozen, and then when near death placed in bed with prostitutes, to see if body heat and sexual passion could restore them to warmth, was inspired by his belief in animal magnetism, the reciprocal action between all living bodies. So yeah, they're against all of these horrible things like prostitution and the decadence of society. Meanwhile, using the prostitutes to do, in Himmler's case here, very strange experiments. So at the end of the day, all of these people end up being hypocrites. Through his decrees to SS men on marriage and procreation, what do I have? Oh, we're not there yet. Okay. Excuse me. Through his decrees to SS men on marriage and procreation, he hoped to create a mutant race of supermen. Under his direction, Jewish and Russian heads were severed and sent in hermetically sealed containers to a research center to be analyzed for subhuman traits. Just before the end of the war, when the Reich was crumbling, Schellenberger arranged a meeting between Himmler and the Swedish Count Folke Bernadotte to negotiate surrender. Schellenberg urged his superior not to expound on his astrological and philosophical theories, right? Don't talk about all your weird shit with them, Himmler. Don't do it. But even at that tense moment, Himmler could not resist putting aside the urgent talk of peace to lecture for an hour on runes. Can you even imagine? Oh my God. To the discerning eye, he insisted the uninterrupted script of the Northmen of the Dark Ages resembled Japanese ideograms, and that this was evidence that the Japanese too were Aryans. The image that Himmler apparently had of himself was that of an idealistic man of science, yet it was a piece of role-playing, and one is never sure whether he really deceived himself as well as others with it. So I wrote Himmler was LARPing here in the margin. As fanatical and earnest as he was in the pursuit of his crazy researches, they were convenient rationales for his ideology, as they were for Hitler. The image of the dispassionate scientific researcher was often distorted. So, for instance, Hermann Rosching reports a conversation with Himmler, incensed at the audacity of a professor who dared criticize the Nazi dogma about the origins of the Teutons. Quote, "What ideas," he said, "these gentlemen got into their heads. If the state or the party had declared that a certain view was regarded as the desired starting point for scientific research, that view must be accepted simply as a scientific axiom." Kind of sounds like the Democrats in the 2020 era. We don't care a hoot whether this or something else was the real truth about the prehistory of the German tribes, said Himmler. Science proceeds from hypotheses that change every year or two, so there's no earthly reason why the party should not lay down a particular hypothesis as the starting point, even if it runs counter to the current scientific opinion. The one and only thing that matters to us, and the thing these people are paid for by the state, is to have ideas of history that strengthen our people in their necessary national pride. In all of this troublesome business, we are only interested in one thing: to project into the dim and distant past the picture of our nation as we envisage it for the future. Every bit of Tacitus in his Germania is tendacious stuff. Our teaching of German origins has depended for centuries on falsification. We are entitled to impose one of our own. Prehistory is the doctrine of the eminence of the Germans at the dawn of civilization. Right? So they're always trying to rewrite the past in order to fit their vision of the future. That's a common theme in a lot of these things that I read about these kind of groups. It happens in feminism too. All right. Himmler's views and deeds were not excesses of madness, though they were not always rational. They owe more to the dissociations of the fanatical occultists than they do to the divided personality. And my note here is, what is the difference? If he spent much of his own time and that of his men in investigating crankish researches, this did not diminish his talents for efficient organization. And that's really the key. He was very good, systematic, bureaucratic secretary at the end of the day. If his reality was non-ordinary, it was not because he was crazy, but rather, as his monsieur, Dr. Felix Kirsten, tells us, because he was extremely superstitious. He believed in good and evil spirits and was always afraid of an invisible power to which he would one day have to give an account of himself. And in the margin there I wrote, Satan, question mark. When Dr. Kirsten asked him how, with this view, he could do the things he had to do, believing as he did that according to the doctrine of karma, his deeds would determine his destiny in the next incarnation, Himmler answered, quote, "You oughtn't to look at things from such a limited and egotistical point of view. You have to consider the Germanic world as a whole, which also has its karma." Interesting. So what is the karma of Germany now? I'll leave that for my audience. A man has to sacrifice himself, even though it is very hard for him. He oughtn't to think of himself. Of course, it's pleasanter to concern yourself with flower beds rather than political dust heaps and refuse dumps. But flowers themselves won't thrive unless these things are seen to. I try to reach a compromise in my own life. I try to help people and do good, relieve the oppressed, and remove injustices wherever I can. Do you think my heart's in all the things which have to be done simply from reasons of the state? Why wouldn't I give, or what I wouldn't give, to be the minister for religious matters like Bernhard Rust and be able to dedicate myself to positive achievements only. End quote. Over and over again, Himmler referred to the work of the SS men in concentration camps as sacrifice. It was as though they had to suffer a greater ordeal than their victims. One of his most interesting speeches to his officers sympathizes with this ordeal, to have stuck it out, and at the same time to have remained decent fellows. That is what has made this us hard. This is a page of glory in our history which has never been written and is never to be written. Every cause has its idea of sacrifice, calling on the individual to give up his well-being for the sake of something greater. Himmler's idea of sacrifice was influenced by Eastern philosophy, and that's why I wrote about detachment at the beginning of this. And I think a lot of Eastern philosophy promotes this idea of detachment. And once you're doing something like that, it's a lot easier to commit atrocities in the name of your ideology, let's say. He had read the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas, the Rig Vedas, and the sayings of Buddha, the Visuddhimagga and the Book of Purity, and had learned to practice detachment from his acts, which, while it might seem silly or monstrous to the foolish, was purifying to the wise. So here's some images I found from an interesting website that has the Bhagavad Gita. You can listen to it in Sanskrit if you're so inclined. So he was a big fan of this text, and so was Oppenheimer, the creator of one of the creators of the atom bomb. Karma required only that the individual carry on his unavoidable duties, disregarding the consequences. As it is written in the Bhagavad Gita, one should not give up the activity to which one is born, even though this should be attended. Let me start that again. One should not give up the activity to which one is born, right? You're on some kind of life path and you have to do that. The duty which is incumbent on one through birth, caste, or profession, right? As we see in India, still has a caste system, even though this should be attended by evil, for all undertakings are enveloped by evil as fire by smoke. So to me, this just sounds like it's very doomer, you're on this path. It's fate. It doesn't matter if it's evil or not. The disengagement from the effects of fulfilling one's duties with self-sacrifice. Himmler was particularly fond of the Bhagavad Gita and told Dr. Kirsten that he never moved without it. He prized it for its great Aryan qualities. He was also an avid student of the Arathasastra, this book here, another ancient text, Hinduism's anticipation of Machiavelli. And this is a book that is dedicated to statecraft, politics, economics, and it covers things, the duties of kings, government officials, law, war, etc. It's a statecraft book, and it is ancient. So Himmler was a big fan. And all of this is to point out that a lot of these groups really dislike Christianity, because Christianity is about humanity and about love. And I mean, even Hitler said that he lamented that the Germans were Christian at all, because he, in his mind, thought Christianity made people weak. So this book was cherished by Himmler. Here was laid out a crafty system for international espionage in the service of the tyrant state, from which a fanatical Nazi flunky could learn a good deal. Its Oriental despots and warriors were Himmler's people, Aryans. Their amorality accorded well with his own and could even be linked to the divine essence. The artifices and cunning advocated by the I'm not going to be able to say this. K-A-U, Kautilya, were nowhere practiced more heartily than in the Third Reich, where hypocrisy and deception were raised to a fine art. Well, again, the more things change, huh? Himmler began more and more to propagate occult ideas among the SS. When several astronomers were courageous enough to call Oerbigger's theory an outmoded concept, remember him with his world ice theory, Himmler answered, quote, I advocate unrestricted research of whatever kind, and that includes unrestricted research into glacial cosmology. I intend to encourage the research, and in doing so, I find myself in the best company, as the Fuhrer, too, is a convinced supporter of this theory, so much abominated by scientific hacks. The ministry must put these opinionated schoolmasters in their place. There are a great many things we should like to see researched, even by non-scientists. Under his supervision in the SS, a great many things were researched. The crank succeeded eventually in having millions of men explore his fanatical notions, sending to their ruin millions more. And that is the end of the chapter about Himmler. Let me see if you guys have anything to say. It's helpful information. I know, it's very interesting, isn't it? And it's pretty condensed, so it covers a lot. And it doesn't go into detail about, what the Nazis did, because everybody knows that already. It was covered in other books, but yeah, I think it's an interesting book. You've seen wild turkeys go through a yard and fly into a tree to roost. Interesting. I mean, I'm often thinking that the Freemasons weren't even bad guys. Perhaps that's a controversial thing to say, but they, they believed in enlightenment, and they founded this country. So I don't know. I don't think they could be all bad. The all-seeing eye, like on the back of the dollar bill, dollar bills, dollar bill. Why not? Pyramid. The eye of Providence, the eye of Ra. They were obsessed with Egypt. The Nazis, yeah, they were. So despite all of their hemming and hawing about the perversions of the decadent Jewish people, they were perverts themselves. And I think sometimes, not all the time, but when people make loud protests about something, they're often doing that thing. That seems to be a pattern of human nature. Save warnings from your parents. What about turkeys? Or what? I'm not sure. uh, they hate Christianity because they're of their father, the devil. Yeah, they're Satanists. They're the most famous Satanists. I think they serve as a very informative template for the rest of people who would involve themselves in the dark arts, etc. So I'm seeing like Monday isn't really like such a popular time, but I do appreciate both of the people who are here right now. I think I'll just wrap it up in this case. But yeah, Terry's totally right. They hate Christianity because they're Satanists. And they serve Satan. And yeah,
I'm not really sure. Let's see. We have how many chapters left of this book? We just did chapter 9, so altogether there are 16 chapters. Maybe I'll just do one where it's like a marathon and I read like the whole rest of the book. That's not going to be today. So I think Terry Strange and Tumo Plots, and I think Dejan Paul was here earlier for tuning in today. And I will be back at some point in the future. I hope Terry live streams soon. Maybe you'll read more of, what is it, St. Augustine. It's very interesting stuff. So, yes, thank you both. It means a lot to me. And I appreciate you. So, enjoy the rest of your day. And I'll catch you on the flip side. Take care.